Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're discussing Raised by Wolves, episodes 8 and 9. These two episodes develop quite a lot of information and build to a Season 1 finale this Thursday that looks to be just as mysterious as the rest of the show. Pregnant androids, Marcus losing his mind, and possibly a humanoid species that worships dice with heads on them. Oh, and a teaser about my biggest theory yet. Let's jump into it. Episode 8 is titled Mass, and it begins with Marcus in a dream, ripping his face off, waking up only a tad bit more sane as he talks to Paul about his faith and his mouse. This change in Marcus has been building for a few episodes now, but in these two episodes, it really comes to a point. We next see Mother arriving at the Fallen Ark and Campion trying to dig his way out of the silo. Campion is being haunted by Tally, who openly and in the middle of the day is talking to him now, despite his cries against it. He no longer wants to hear this being that he can see is Tally talking to him. So off screen, they must have had, this going on for quite a while. I wonder why this change is happening and why the voice is now being so aggressive toward him. Campion is rapidly reciting father jokes as a way to comfort himself, and man, I don't know why, but that really hit me hard. I feel so bad for him here, and it's really awesome that father's influence can be felt even in death. He's providing comfort for the people that he loves, even in his current hobbled state. We then see Father, who is being analyzed by Hunter, figuring out the soul is the light passcode. This comes in handy, of course, later when Hunter has the change of heart and restores the previous build of Father. It's not exactly clear why Father was signaling this in Morse code over and over, but I think we can assume this was some kind of backdoor built by Campion in case things ever go south, but ultimately it's left to what we think it is. We then see Mother at the Fallen Ark. We meet Carl, who I'm partial to, but honestly, I'm glad he was not a big part of this series. The prolonged use of him would probably come off as gimmicky, just as maybe the little sample of it did here. This episode, he acts as the troubleshooting party to determine a real-life entity growing inside of Mother. This unbelievable thing could only be confirmed by someone we have complete trust in, such as an impartial Mithraic android designed for human and android medical procedures. I believe that, his analysis is accurate because of his position. Mother and Paul then talk about leaving for the tropical zone and how Dad doesn't necessarily need to be going with them. It's a pretty risky move since he and she just reconnected, but ultimately, when push comes to shove and Marcus senses something is wrong, Paul does not give way, and he does not tell on his mother. Mother and Carl begin analysis on her abdominal pain, and my jaw dropped when we see a spherical object growing inside of her. Immediately, my mind started racing, trying to understand how, and I think I know exactly what is going on here. If you recall, this mystery creature was tracking the family for some reason yet to be revealed. It left a black-headed doll for Mother to find on the Ark simulation chamber after the image of Tally led her there. We get a ton of references to sex, including the literal process while she's in the simulation, and the fact that Tempest was raped while she was in this simulation bed. I believe the images we see later on that are now on the screen are this creature's humanoid race, and the single one that we see has been tasked with repopulating. It led her to this remote area where, like Marcus said before, she could not see or hear while she's inside, and I believe that it impregnated her in some kind of way that wasn't necessarily immediately detectable. When describing this theory to my wife, I envisioned something like the alien eggs. I really hope the season doesn't end with her stomach exploding open and alien babies falling out, but I think, again, it was some form of impregnation that is explicitly non-human. She refers to the creature being half carbon-based, which does also align with this. With this theory and the events of last episode, it also aligns with the voice not wanting Marcus to kill Mother. The voice even tried bartering with Marcus, telling him that if you let her live, you will be king of this land, and now that she has escaped, Marcus hasn't heard them speak since. It was protecting the child inside of her. It was figuratively saying, do not drop her into the pit because my child is inside, and it was saying anything it could to make that happen. It's honestly brilliant, and the only thing I really want to change about my theory crafting this season is the voices and hallucinations being opposed to this creature. I think this creature and this species and their race are doing this. All of it is because of them. The images, the voices, the mouse somehow returning from the dead. I think it's possible that all of this comes from this entity, and really the success of this first season will honestly depend on how well the showrunners reveal this entity in the final episode. I also have a theory later on that elaborates more on this. Back in the breakdown, Carl calls the android's blood Feel Blood, which is the single worst name given to any sci-fi thing in any story ever, and I hate it. And Mother learns that she needs more Feel Blood to keep the fetus alive. We return to the settlement to see Paul sneaking Campion food, getting a talking to by his lunatic father, and Mary and Marcus talking about his newfound belief in soul. The scenes are meant to show Father as manipulative, kind of losing his grasp, and this blossoms into the scene later where he is literally holding Paul against his will, screaming in his face about his mother. It's sad, and part of me still has some love for Marcus because he has been manipulated to become this monster. I don't think he is irredeemable, but I worry that the season may end with his death, and maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing at this point. We then see Marcus and Mary shortly after the face change, walking through the gates to board the Ark. We see a heartbreaking sight as believers of soul are left behind and, wondering why. I imagine many weren't included because of their rank in the church. Surely they had to decide who to take and who not to because of space, and the inclusion of high-ranking members of the church is something that we've already seen. A mix of military and non-military believers that ultimately held the position of power to secure a seat aboard. A little atheist boy blows up the fence and everyone makes a run for it. These scenes were included to show us a real bond between Mary and Marcus, but the doubts inside of Mary were from the very beginning and ultimately shown because the next scene is her contemplating their relationship and what is really best for her and Paul. Paul gets Campion an earpiece so they can talk, and Marcus freaks out on Paul until Mary comes into the picture and he has her locked up in the silo, praying to Soul in front of everyone to resolve the conflict and subside suspicion. We see Mother consuming all of the fuel blood that she can find, Paul talking to Campion about using the creature's feet to dig out and escape with him and Mary, then Marcus praying at the altar that gets lit on fire by Campion before he makes his brave escape. Marcus takes this as a sign and starts praying, but Father goes off after Campion. Paul rescues his mother, taking Holly and Vita with them, all of them seemingly done with the faith now that they have been able to live without it. Except for Holly here, there's a little bit of dialogue later that shows that she just kind of thinks the leaders of the church have lost their way. So I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. I think that she is still a believer here. I'm glad that we're seeing this change, and it's expected when you go from being able to do really whatever you want to being forced to follow rules that you don't explicitly need. I'm glad that we have some on-screen time here of the children questioning this, but there is one, and that's Hunter, on the other hand, that is kind of an oddity to me, and we'll talk more about that later. Back on the ship, Mother and Carl talk about the Mithraic propaganda that paints the birth of the necromancer as something of divinity. It's interesting, and I'm a little torn here about, theory crafting what I believe in. At first, I felt the inclusion of this was to add another layer of complexity, saying Mother and her mystery fetus may actually be purposeful because so little is known about the necromancers. But like Mother said, I still think she was programmed by man, and I also think the baby is there because of this mystery being. Quick note, I want to add this to the video. I do break down a theory a little bit more later on, but I think this could actually be reality. I don't want to recant exactly what I just said, but I think Carl may literally be telling us how the church came to power and how necromancers were born, but again, more on that later on. Mother starts feeding on the carcass of the fallen android. She then sees a creature, kills it, and feeds it to the baby, talking to Carl about how impossible this is, leading to the revelation about it being carbon-based before Carl dies. We then see Father tracking Campion. They have a touching moment where, again, we see Campion using what Father taught him before he's almost cut in half. We see Campion stop the potential rape of Mary when a creepy-ass guy tells her and the children it's time to do some penance. Then Mother and Tempest reuniting in the Ark, which I'm so happy about, before Mother makes her leave because she ultimately doesn't trust herself right now. Oh yes, we also have another scene of Mother inside an even more broken version of the simulation where Campion is now just a vague figure telling her this baby has always been the real mission. Again, I think this is a manipulation by the creature that impregnated her, But a theory that I have later on, and I'll keep saying this, also aligns with this could literally be telling us the plan, that getting this and repopulating this species from Earth to Kepler-22b was the plan from the very beginning. But again, more on that later. Then we come to episode 9, titled Umbilical. Starting off, we see Tempest scavenging for food and coming across the one and only Otho. Now, I'm upset about a few things here. Firstly, him still being in this iron mask means the dialogue between him and Marcus was ultimately useless a couple episodes ago, and I hate useless dialogue. Second, him suddenly having a flat screen TV on the inside of this thing makes it so much less of a prison. Also, takes away from the cool "how did he know he was looking" moment when Marcus checked on him and he somehow knew that someone was watching. It also does not make sense because he flat out said that he could not see before. And it kind of doesn't make sense again why this thing would be included at all. My only thought is perhaps after the android was incapacitated, he was able to change the programming to enable this. And if that was the case, then we have more useless dialogue where he said if anything was changed, it would crush his head. So I am irked by his still imprisoned existence, but ultimately glad that Tempest was able to slay her demon at the end of everything. Mother shows up and starts draining him, which is an incredibly badass and creepy and haunting moment. And this entire episode, she feeds off of him. And it's a pretty interesting moral challenge when you consider, people observe this and are okay with it. Surely he doesn't deserve anything better, but being slowly drained of all of your blood until you die is a pretty gnarly way to go. Even more so if my theory at the end of the video is true and he was actually manipulated to rape these girls and women. Similarly to how Marcus is now being manipulated and has lost the voice of what he believed to be soul. Back at the settlement, Marcus cuts off Father's finger for tapping too much. Hunter comes to terms with being the only kid left because everyone else ran away without him. And while they're loading the lander with supplies, he has a change of heart and reawakens Father. Now, I am a little put off at how quick this change was for him. Like, you literally got this android killed and the settlement taken over. You are banking on forgiveness that you aren't at all guaranteed. And after he reverts him, he rejoices at his awakening before he even knows where he stands, right? And again, like, Father is forgiving. I talked about this last. It would probably be a teaching moment if he ever was restored, but all we know up to this point about Hunter's feelings toward Father is a little bit of fear, and in the other children, the negative effects of the church now being back. We have not built to this big character-driven moment at all, this change of heart. I feel like we really could have used a scene where Hunter is doubting the church before this incredible switch to just betray them like he does. I will say, when Father came back and started with a joke, my heart melted. Thank goodness he is alive. I don't know what it is about this actor. He just gives off good vibes. I want him to tuck me in at night and read me a bedtime story or something. Hunter convinces Marcus to go with them. They take off to the structure he believes to be a temple in the sand worshipping soul, and Mary struggles to figure out what comes next with her and the kids. They land at the black structure, and we see Marcus is in a really tough spot. He prays for guidance and to know if his son trusts him. I again feel bad for Marcus here. He desperately tries to hear the voice that once spoke to him, and even if it spoke to him again, it would not be advising his success. He is a lost man who believes himself to be something he is not, and it's arguable if it's really his fault at this point. Back at the Fallen Ark, Holly finds the tooth of Romulus, and this got me so excited. The mythology of Remus and Romulus is a complicated story where two twin brothers who were at one point raised by a she-wolf found Rome and eventually become hostile, ending with one of the brothers killing the other. The full story is much more in-depth and honestly quite interesting, but the point in relation to Raised by Wolves is that Paul and Campion could be viewed as Remus and Romulus of this new land, one of them already planning to build the next big Rome, and the early stages of their fighting have already threatened to divide them in this foreign plane. I believe the inclusion of this incredible foreshadowing with the tooth means that one of them will kill the other, but I'm not sure if this will be a season 1 arc or not. Personally, I'd much rather see this tension of these early childhood fights build to something much more impactful later on. Mother and Tempest talk about her being impregnated while in the simulation and how they are traveling to a place where the delivery will be most successful. I'm not really sure how to take that because I think the settlement is probably the safest spot, and the Ark may be a good number 2 in terms of supplies and shelter at this point, but from her point of view, the settlement is gone and they are actively leaving the Ark right now. I'm really curious if she was somehow instructed to go to the giant die in the sand and we just have not seen those instructions on screen. But honestly, I'm a little stumped here, so if you wanted to comment down below where you think she's headed, that would be pretty amazing. They walk until they see metal in the hills and go down to see the cards that the mystery figure had in his cave. They are some kind of instructions, I think, or maybe some kind of prophecy. And those may be the same thing depending on your perspective. And I believe they depict the story of them being here on this planet, or them coming to this planet and repopulating. Mary and the children arrive, the kids defend Mother and convince Mary to give her a shot after some hard-stuck beliefs that there is no way she is actually pregnant. Back in the desert, Hunter gets questioned by Marcus, reveals that he is the worst liar in the history of the world because he keeps turning to Father every 2 seconds, showing his cowardice or something, I don't know, almost ruining the secret that he was restored. The scene escalates when Marcus doesn't believe Hunter to be telling the truth and shoves his arm into the hole, only to find that it wasn't burned. They believe it to be divine intervention or soul's blessing, but ultimately it just spirals Marcus even further away from sanity. Hunter and Father make a daring escape that night, and Marcus goes on to execute someone as an offering, hearing nothing in return. The others question his spirituality during these moments, and it leads to them marching back through the sands and him being exposed by Lucius when he was questioned about praying over the dead that are not believers. If the rest of them make it back, surely none of them will trust Marcus any longer, or Marcus will be dead, though I don't think that's how this character, ultimately dies. So I suspect that he will be outed to the rest unless he is somehow able to kill the other 3 and makes up a story about their deaths in order to keep this power. The other final string of this episode's story is inside of the cave where Mother, Mary, and the children are. Mary and Mother have a couple heart-to-hearts about the reality of things, empathy. Mother knows Mary is an imposter but promises not to say anything. I'm really glad how this relationship developed over the course of this episode and ultimately what it means going forward. Mother ventures out into the cold where Otho is and she scans the metal cards. Now, they contain some clearly non-human text, and this is where the theory all began. This is the point where I went, holy moly, what if this is Mithraic text and this is the origin story of the entire faith? Like, soul is real and this planet is where it came from, and Carl was right about them not knowing everything about necromancers because it's literally alien instructions being sent to them. And these things are speaking to the humans so that they would create this faith to worship a fake or maybe real entity and ultimately lead to the war that destroyed the planet and made them come here in the first place. This would be a colossal twist, and I think it is not too far out of the realm of possibility here. I mean, how would she even know how to scan this thing, or that you could scan this thing, or how to interpret what these markings meant? When she scans the card, she sees what are likely worshippers dressed in black standing around one of the holes, and a 12-sided object with a head on it. It may not necessarily be a head, but I think if you look at the top, it does kind of look like it could unfold to reveal the rest of the body if this isn't just the natural body. It also immediately reminded me of the prison system where Otho had his entire body exposed and only his head covered. Maybe it's the opposite here, and they are about to yeet this dude into one of the holes. He foams from the mouth a white substance that looks just like fuel blood, and it probably is, because if my theory is true, then it means this is fuel blood, and they sent the instructions for fuel blood along with the instructions to create the necromancers to Earth in order to start this entire chain reaction. I think this creature that is growing inside of Mother is of the same race, and I don't know exactly, what I think about the race and if they're still around, or if there's only one, or if, this one was tasked with repopulating the species or what, but I think it is very possible any of those, and I ultimately think the creature growing inside of her is this species. Mother starts getting some internal pain again and returns from the scan to find Otho reversing the flow of blood and becoming the Hulk. Now, this was definitely the weirdest thing I expected to happen with this dude. I mean, I totally did not see a human somehow reabsorbing the blood that just left his body, likely fused with the DNA from Mother and or the fetus, and becoming a whole ass Hulk. I think it's interesting to consider he may have been told to do this, like in order to interrupt Mother from discovering what was really growing inside of her. But where it stands, he just does this on his own free will, and instead of killing him instantly because he's injecting alien agents into the back of his neck, it gives him plus 20 on all strength rolls for the rest of the game. I just did not expect this, man. Otho tries taking Tempest again, which makes me think the voice that commanded him to rape in the first place is also the voice manipulating things here on Kepler 22b, which only adds to the theory that this really is the origin of Soul, and this whole thing was just to get mankind to harvest their planet and destroy it and come here for consumption or something. Back to the breakdown though, Holly saves the day here with a super brave stance that allows Tempest to run off with the android head. We see the helmet crush his skull before Hunter and Father land close by and reunite with the rest. Father and Mother have a touching moment and they discuss the baby before Father goes off to find it something to eat, finally able to provide for Mother when she can't and when it's needed most. I love that they got this moment together. Paul then hears the voice and goes and burns the metal cards, making it impossible for Mother or anyone else to find out more information. He then goes back and talks with Campion, making amends for their fighting and saying that he has a lot of hope for the baby growing inside of Mother. The baby starts moving again, and the scene ends with a tiny bit of hope that is undoubtedly going to be stripped away in the finale. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Now, these two episodes were really something that changed so much of the story, and I am pumped for the finale. I think I may be able to produce one more video before Thursday, just to kind of isolate a theory about this soul manipulation plan and the alien species kind of bringing humanity here and creating the religion to ultimately keep their own population growing. I would like to make it its own video just so it's a lot more clear what I'm saying here, because I do realize that I jump around a little bit. But yeah, I really hope you like this video. Please let me know your thoughts, theories, and comments down below. And a special thank you to Michael Linck, who is our top tier donor over on Patreon. Much love, everybody, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again very soon.